We've asked Freja Leonard from Friends of the Earth and also Sarah Rogan from Environment Victoria if they would be kind enough to give us early comments on what took place. Freja is Friends of the Earth, normally residing in Melbourne. No More Gas campaigner in Victoria. Freja, I know, has a great knowledge inside how parties operate in the Victorian state, and I love, she keeps a spreadsheet, historical spreadsheet of all the swings and all the ups and downs around the seats year on year or election on election in Victoria. So if you want to know what happened in the 2009 election and what the swing was in Melbourne, Freja will be able to help you.
I'm just that much of a nerd.
Sarah is climate campaigner at Environment Victoria, coordinating the organisations. This is Environment Victoria climate change work. Previously, Sarah was a senior campaigner and strategy specialist at Oxfam Australia, managing the What She Makes campaign, which is for a living wage for garment workers in global supply chains, and the Make Tax Fair campaign on multinational tax dodging. So that's pretty topical. The clothes that we wear coming in from wherever, Bangladesh or China, whatever, that was a big part of what Sarah was working on. Sarah spent many years as a union organiser in the arts and entertainment industry, as well as in women's rights and gender-based advocacy. Sarah sits on branch executive of the Australian Services Union as the NGO sector representative, is a board director at CoPower, and is a former convener of the Victorian Pride Lobby and committee member of Transgender Victoria. Sarah is proud of her Malaysian Chinese heritage, and we're proud too, Sarah, so welcome. Okay, I'm going to throw to you, Freja, to give us your early comments on the election that's just been.
There was a lot of argy and bargy in the lead up to the state election, and it was really hard to get a read on what was going to happen in advance. You know, given the results of the federal election, and that was the most disruptive federal election, certainly in my lifetime, you know. And to see so many teals, to see so many minor parties, to see so many Greens in there, it was, and you know, to see really like long-held blue ribbon Liberal seats like Kooyong fall, absolutely remarkable. I had a concern that we might, in Victoria, be watching a massive backflip. You know, there'd been all of the freedom protests, the anti-mask, anti-vaxxer mandate protests, anti-lockdown, the whole dictator Dan rhetoric. There's also, you know, a long history of whoever forms government at the federal level at the following state election will see the opposite party take government. And so I had some concerns that we might wake up on Sunday morning to Matt Guy as Premier. Quietly relieved that that didn't happen. I don't think that he had the policy detail that we needed to see, particularly in the key areas. But we did see an across the board, generally speaking, light swing to the Liberal Party. We saw in some seats, like Brighton, for instance, James Newbury has seen quite a considerable swing in his electorate, even though there were two teal independents who ran quite active campaigns in his electorate. That didn't end up scooping up the votes that we might have anticipated off the back of the federal election. So there was a sort of general swing to the Liberals, but not enough for it to really change seats. So far, it looks like only about 7 or 8 seats have actually shifted across the entire state. That's not that many. And one of those seats is Richmond, which went to the Greens. Now, that's an election result that we should have perhaps seen, you know, 2 or 3 cycles ago, but for a variation of factors, not least of which being Richard Wynn's popularity as a fairly left, you know, on the left of Labor, a Labor left factional player. Also really good to, I note that the Greens are returning to an upper house seat that they did hold for 3 election cycles, and that's Southern Metropolitan. It looks like Catherine Cropsey, who's a councillor at Port Phillip Council, is going to be, will have enough quota to take an upper house seat. But I'm really kind of now just keeping an eye on the upper house, because I think that's where we're going to see the most interesting mix. And we've always seen the most interesting mix of different political players. And we will see, a combination of very left and very right-wing parties. One other thing that I've noticed in looking through the sort of generalised results across the different electorates, and this is really interesting to note for anyone who's engaged politically, is more and more right-wing minor parties. So the Freedom Party, United Australia Party used to be Palmer United Party. Family First came back. Who knew? I thought we would never see their like again, but there they were, and each of them were polling not enough to get their deposit back. So they were all polling under 4%, and in most cases it's more like 1 or 2%. And what they're doing is they're splitting the right wing vote. So it's may they continue. May there be at the next election another 5 minor ultra-right parties splitting the vote and stealing the primary vote from the Liberals and the Nationals. But it creates a really interesting political landscape. I was kind of tossing between we're going to see quite a right-wing backflip and we're going to see a change of government, or were we going to see more of the same that we had at the federal election, have this really disruptive political result? Neither of those things happened. It was quite a measured electoral response from Victoria across the board, and I think that's really interesting. Interesting to note as well. No, I wasn't that surprised to see Hawthorn has gone to the Liberals. There's more of a showing of nuance in politics in Australia nowadays, and Victoria has definitely been a leader of that, and it's lovely to see that continuing. This creates some real opportunities as well, because we've had an election campaign that was supposed to be run on cost of living. That was supposed to be the central backbone to the policy announcements and the real sort of underpinning logic behind the policy announcements from especially the majors. We were all told months ago that this was going to be a cost of living campaign. And what it ended up doing, I think, was by stealth almost became an energy election campaign. And to a lesser extent, forests. And this is of note because it's been a long time really since a state election campaign had forests as one of the more discussed issues. Forests was a really, really big issue in Victoria maybe 2 decades ago, but it's gone a little bit quiet. Every so often you'll hear Vic Forests was taken to court over non-compliance. Every so often an article will come out that sort of interrogates Vic Forests and the $124 million a year that they suck out of the state government in order to keep 300 individuals in a job. It's such an outrageous story, and it has so little showing in media. So it was great to see that actually finally becoming a state election campaign. We saw who else, and just a quick show of hands, if you were checking out Liberal policies and you saw a policy document about 2 weeks ago that said that the Liberals were planning to return to fracking and reopen fracking as a legal activity in Victoria. I saw it and I wish I'd screen capped it, because the following week that policy had disappeared off their website and was replaced with a 100-page document that mentioned no less than 4 times that they were not going to resume fracking in Victoria. It seems to me that a trap was laid and Labor fell into it. And for anyone who was paying attention last week and saw that a number of Labor candidates went strong, pointing the finger at Liberals, saying they're planning to resume fracking, and then only to have the Liberals stand up and go, no, we never. Here's this policy that says, or here's this policy document that says 4 times that we're not going to resume fracking. Was really interesting, and it really just goes to show the extent to which energy, fracking, the climate are the key issues that the major parties particularly think are going to make or break the vote for them. So that gave me cheer, because that means that for anyone who is planning to campaign on energy issues, they're obviously very much at front of mind for our MPs at the moment. And they really, that now is the time for us to start nailing them to commitments. We need to take the work that the Victorian government has done on the Victorian gas substitution roadmap, and we need to push them for more detail. There's an announcement about the SEC, which is super exciting. It's a state government saying that they're going to renationalise energy. And we need to really call for some detail. Well, there wasn't really enough detail for us to get too excited about it, but it's an encouraging announcement. So we need to be really pressuring the government to provide more detail on exactly what the SEC is going to look and feel like, how it's going to walk and talk. We obviously need to go large on forests. You know, if we're talking about this decade, I mean, so over the coming 4 years, we need to set up a number of mechanisms that are going to help us tackle and address dangerous climate change. This is our last opportunity to really get this over the line. And I'm saying this to you, the amazing people of Lighter Footprints, because I have seen what you can do, and I've seen how incredibly intelligent you are in tackling these issues, and amazingly effective. We need all boots on the ground to save forests. We need all boots on the ground to stop the gas industry. We need a rapid uptick in renewables, and we need, we need pressure on all parties and all representatives in the parliament, not just the government, to commit to try and outdo each other in coming up with strong, effective, long-term policy, because it's not just this electoral cycle. What we're setting them up for is then more ambitious action in the following electoral cycle. The state government has committed to, in the lead up to the election, they committed to an increased emissions reduction target of 75 to 80% on 2009 levels by 2030. We need to know exactly how they're going to get there, and that they made that announcement and they mentioned only coal-fired power and renewables, and they didn't mention gas is a glaring omission. So we really, really need more detail out of the government, and we really, really need an active plan about how they're going to get there. So not just are they going to shut down the gas transmission network, but when are they going to shut down the gas transmission network? When are they going to ban new gas connections? Will the current on-foot hydrogen project be a green hydrogen project? At the moment, the talk is that it's going to be brown through to blue through to green. Well, that's just not good enough. Are they really planning to put hydrogen in the main system? I mean, are they really? So we really need to interrogate the detail, and we need some really, really strong commitments from governments, from the state government, but from all players in the parliament. We need other MPs to be applying pressure alongside our own advocacy work. We need to make sure that we hold them to account. A lot of focus happens in the pre-election period and in securing commitments from MPs, from candidates. And that's all well and good, but we also really, really need the follow-up. We need to be holding them to account, and we need to make sure that they do what they said they would do in the lead up to the election. So that's our task. over, the coming 4 years, really. And we need to start. I think we can all just take a bit of a break. Everyone's worked really hard, and the upper house is still, being decided. But I would say that from around the middle of January, we need to absolutely get cracking.
Hand over to you, Sarah, and welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Mick. Hello, everyone. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which I'm on, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to elders past and present and leaders emerging. I extend that acknowledgement to the many countries from which all of you are calling in from this evening, where First Nations people have cared for land country and sea country for millennia. This land was stolen and sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. So a couple of sort of post-election comments, and then I can also touch a little bit on what Environment Victoria will be looking at working on a little bit in 23 and beyond to hold the new government to account, as Freya said, is so important for us to be doing. So I suppose one sort of thing to say in summary is that Victorians have elected a government with the most ambitious climate action agenda in Australian history. And it is actually nation-leading plans to ramp up clean energy and cut climate pollution. If we're looking at their commitments on clean energy and renewables, it's nation-leading, which is quite exciting to be a part of. But it actually shows what's possible after decades of community-led work to shift the debate around climate policy. And this outcome from the state election will see Victoria's energy system shift from the dirtiest in the country to the cleanest as coal closes over the next decade. So our work at Environment Victoria hones in on the biggest emissions in the state, which is burning fossil fuels for energy. So Labor's commitment to phasing out all of Victoria's coal-powered stations by 2035 and replacing them with clean renewable energy is welcome, and it comes after years and years of climate activists campaigning to end coal. Of course, 2035 is not actually fast enough, and so we need to keep putting pressure on the new state government and the federal government to ramp up their ambition and to make sure the clean energy transition happens faster and fairer. And so in terms of us, and this is also sort of reflecting on election outcomes, but then sort of within the context of what we'll be doing over the next year or so. Some of you would have seen our election campaign was called Clean Energy for All. That will continue on in 2030, expanded from the time-bound election campaign to be the ongoing scaffolding for our climate campaigning more broadly. And so the overarching vision of Clean Energy for All is 100% renewable energy by 2030. A fast and fair transition to renewable energy. And using clean as the theme to link the focus areas of the campaign, our strategy over the next 12 months is made up of sort of 3 key areas or streams, and it speaks directly to the work that still needs to be done in the state. There's clean energy households, which is looking at household energy efficiency and electrification powered by renewables, providing clear long-term investment signal to renewable energy investors. We want to see government incentives or rebates for households to electrify, widespread retrofits, and a plan for public housing and low-income earners. And we really want to attack the gas industry and bring them down and remove their social license to operate. The next focus area is cleanup and community-led transition, which is about Latrobe Valley mine closures and rehabilitation plans, refocusing community and business conversation on the opportunities in a post-coal era. And of course, a just transition for Latrobe Valley workers and the wider communities to show the success in transitioning to renewable energy careers or jobs in other sectors. And of course, we want communities across the state to be participating in the clean energy transformation. And the third stream that we'll be looking at, again with the linking word clean, is a clean energy economy. So looking at how we can build social license for renewables and transmission development, the opportunities in clean manufacturing and renewable powered jobs, the clean energy infrastructure, and opportunities for people living in renewable energy zones. So I'll unpack some of that just a little bit, potentially not too much on gas, because that is Freya's absolute area of expertise, but to look a little bit deeper into the work in the Latrobe Valley and campaigning for a community-led transition there, and bringing attention to the massive issue of cleaning up Hazelwood specifically. I can dig into that a bit. So the toxic pit left behind from the Hazelwood mine is bigger than Melbourne CBD, and cleaning it up will be the largest rehabilitation project Victoria has ever seen. And the current proposal is to flood the mine pit, turning it into an artificial lake, with plans to divert the Morwell River. This would have serious consequences for the Latrobe River system, Aboriginal cultural heritage, and the internationally recognised Gippsland lakes. We want to hold mine owners responsible for cleaning up the mines properly and safely, and ensure that rehabilitation has the best outcome for the Gippsland environment and the community. One of the things that we'll be looking at doing is, after we secured the environmental effects statement for the Hazelwood rehabilitation, working alongside Friends of Latrobe Water and Environmental Justice Australia, we want to ensure that the community is actually engaged throughout the process, so they can illustrate the opportunities in a future beyond coal. We're expecting the EES to come at some point next year, although it keeps being delayed, and we'll be looking at appearing at the public hearings when they go ahead. And we're also pushing for government coordination for a valley-wide plan for rehabilitation. And we'll be asking the government whether they're going to proactively plan for the other two mines as well when they close. One of the areas that sort of fits into this broader work is, I'm sure a lot of you would have heard of our EPA legal challenge. We took the Environmental Protection Authority and the Victoria's 3 energy companies to the Supreme Court for failing to limit toxic air pollution from coal burning power stations and choosing not to place limits on greenhouse gas emissions. So we'll be expecting a decision for the judicial review, which was held in October last month. We'll expect a decision in the first half of next year. And if we win, the EPA will likely have to redo their homework and comply with the law, essentially. And also the EPA's decision to let power stations get away with emitting dangerous levels of greenhouse gases and toxic chemicals could be scrapped. And if the case is successful, it could set broader precedents for how the impacts of climate change are grappled with in government decision-making, and could lead to much stronger pollution limits on power stations and reduce the health burden that coal burning power stations have on our communities. And so I suppose the only thing that I'll mention on gas, which is where a big chunk of our focus will be on clean energy households, is that we know that the gas industry will resist the transition to a cleaner, fairer energy system every step of the way to protect their profits. And we know that they'll be ramping up scare campaigns to stall the transition off gas. And we want to keep exposing just how bad polluting gas is for our climate, energy bills, and health. And we know that the public knowledge about the dangers of gas is years and years behind coal. So we have a bit of work to do to on that education about the harms of gas publicly. And so with the election behind us, we're looking ahead to the opportunities for the Clean Energy for All campaign. One of the big things for us is ensuring that the energy transition benefits everyone, including the First Nations on whose country every wind turbine, solar panel and transition line will be built. We want to push the government to ensure that a revised SEC makes our energy system not only cleaner, but also fairer, for example, by returning a share of the profits to First Nations and control over where and how renewable energy infrastructure is built. So, of course, there's a lot of work to be done to ensure that the government delivers on their election promises. And as Freya touched on, with native forests still being logged and an extinction crisis threatening many of our iconic plants and animals, it's clear our government needs to seriously step up to protect nature. And so while I've sort of said that some of the plans around renewable energy are good, there's still a lot of work that they need to do on forests and nature. I will end it there. I noticed there's a few comments coming through. I'll throw back to the facilitators for the Q&A, and I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you, everybody.
All right, well, we'll start with a question about the upper house or the Legislative Council. Do we know when we'll know more about the makeup of the upper house, and what impact will the changes in the upper house have
I'll jump on that because I worked for Upper House MPs for 13 years. We know when we won't know, and that is this week. You know, it takes a long time. The Upper House vote is a long, frustrating count. It's often subject to recounts because it can come down to just the difference of a couple of hundred votes, even under 100 votes between the last two candidates on the ticket. You know, there's 5 candidates on the Upper House, 5 seats in the Upper House per region. And when it comes down to the last one, that can be so hotly contested. And I have stood in hot boxes that have been hired by the VEC for the recount for days and weeks sometimes, scrutineering the recount. So don't get too excited. Just you got to, we've just got to wait and see what's going to end up happening. But it is it's really interesting, the candidates that are running in the Upper House. So Nina Springle, who I used to work for actually for the Greens, this time has run for the Reason Party in there's a newly created region, that's the Northeast Metropolitan region. Jeff Shaw, who used to be the MP for Frankston, who was called to account for a number of quite sort of dodgy dealings and poor financial decision making with the parliamentary dollar. He has been running for the United Australia Party in the Upper House. It's just been this complete dog's breakfast. So it's going to be fascinating. Definitely make sure that you've got a lot of popcorn. It's going to be a while before we know. I would say many weeks, and probably not until maybe not even this year before all those regional seats are settled. To move on to the question about what are the opportunities in getting action with the Upper House MPs. There are a number of things that they can't do. They can't introduce money bills. You have to be the government to introduce any bill that imposes a fine, a tax, like anything that really involves money levied against people or companies. You probably won't find that coming in at the Upper House. But what the Upper House can do is request production of documents. They can call for parliamentary inquiries. They can ask uncomfortable questions of the government. They can also introduce private members' bills. And so there is a variety of mechanisms that are available for the Upper House. The Upper House is the house of review. They're really there to hold the lower house to account. And so there's so much opportunity to have MPs, and particularly freshly minted MPs who don't know their way around the system. If you rock up to an MP who's really, was just politically born yesterday, and you say to them, hey, you can call for a parliamentary inquiry into Vic Forests and interrogate where these, hundreds of millions of dollars are going, how that directly benefits the Victorian population, 300 jobs in that much money, how much are the wood chips being sold for? I mean, that information is out there. It's not hard to find, but it's great to shine a light of scrutiny on it. So these are some of the opportunities available to people who want to engage with their Upper House reps.
Freya knows it so well. The only thing I'll add is that I'm very interested to see what happens with Legalise Cannabis. They have a lot of policies on cannabis, not a lot of policies on anything else, which I'm seeing as a pretty good opportunity to be able to get in early with them and brief them on all the environment and climate and clean energy things. That's
just absolutely. And, let's not, the Animal Justice Party were just there about animals. And then in the last couple of months, they've had this political epiphany around climate and are positioned well to be really quite strong players in the parliament, assuming that they have a reasonable representation in the Upper House. So yeah, absolutely. Plus what Sarah just, yes.
My question is sort of an amalgamation from Vicky, Mick, Miff and Sarah in regard to cessation of logging of native forests before 2030. What are the chances of moving the Labor government to cease earlier. Is there any scope in the upper house to influence that? And could it be ended through the courts? We've already seen, haven't we, some quite successful court actions. It's quite exciting. Personally, I think that's the way to go. But so what are your thoughts, Freya and Sarah, about those questions?
Vic Labor are not going to do it without being pushed. They're not going to end native logging in a reasonable time frame without being pushed. They've hung their hat on the 2030 target. At the time, they thought that they should be congratulated for that. They thought it was reasonably ambitious. It's like nice to see that at some point there's going to be an end in sight. And what that does is it creates an opportunity to pressure them to bring that forward, and they have to. They have to really end native logging. They have to have a plan to do that by the end of this year. Most of Victoria's mountain ash forests, the most carbon dense trees in the world, they lock up more carbon than any other single tree in the world, and they're being sold at 6 cents a tonne for wood chip for export. So it's absolutely ridiculous, and it's not going to be hard to tear down the case for Victorian native forest logging. We really just need a bunch of questions about it in the upper house. We need those questions to be strategically put. And if you want to really go into strategy, I would suggest an org the size of Lighter Footprints could do well to target questions for different MPs according to their interests. So maybe get, Animal Justice Party to ask questions about habitat, and have the Greens ask some questions about sort of broader environmental standards and water security. Just target your questions, be clever about what questions you would put to parliamentarians, but absolutely get a bunch of them to try and race each other to call for a parliamentary inquiry. And I think that's going to be the best way to really give it the scrutiny that it needs. And finally, we'll have the death knell that native forest logging should have had, years ago, but here we are. So the next best time is now.
Logging is really is the area in which Labor are doing the worst, essentially, when it comes to environment. I spoke about how they've got reasonably good renewable energy policies, but they're being completely let down by their position on forests. It's completely out of step with what is needed. The industry employs so few people, and our dense carbon sinks are something which needs to be protected, and the money invested into biodiversity protection as well. So all the opportunities that we can take as environmentalists, as Lighter Footprints, as activists in the space are really crucial. And I think the work that the Victorian Forest Alliance have been doing has been really, really fantastic. And their election scorecards and the work that they've been doing over the last a few months in particular, ramping up to the election, has just been really brilliant. So wanted to call them out, because EV focuses so much on renewable energy and everyone's like forest nature, but there's some great work being done out there.
Yeah, Sarah, I don't think the Victoria government has legislated the cessation of native forests by 2030, have they? It's just a promise.
I think you're right. I don't think it's been legislated, but it's the date that they've got at the moment to cease.
Yeah, they do have a forest plan, and that involves transitioning the workers. I forget how many $1 million, 200 million comes to mind, or 20 million. They do have a documented plan. They are starting to ramp down by 2024 from memory, more earnestly, but I think the court actions are really putting a spanner in the works, and I just don't think their plan is viable anymore. So I think they're quite vulnerable at the moment, and it will be a good time, really good time, to ramp up our activity in this area.
I've got a few questions around gas. Legislate local gas guarantee for new supply within the first 6 months of government. He's wondering if either of you could shed some light on what that means.
A gas guarantee, like a reserve for Victoria. Is that right? Was that the first question?
So This is from, I think Rob's found this from a policy, the LNP, legislate a local gas guarantee for new supply within the first 6 months of government.
Yeah, so look, that would be all well and good, but as far as we're concerned, no new supply. Just so that takes that off the table, it's kind of there is a Federal Reserve policy for gas. There's a couple of different triggers for it. I guess the state government could attempt to introduce the same thing, but that flies in the face of everything that we would be campaigning for, which is no new gas, and we're not the only ones. I know that Environment Victoria absolutely sort of stand alongside that same perspective. School Strike for Climate, you name them, if they're environmental not-for-profit organisation, they're going to say no new gas, which leads beautifully to the next question, which was about where are those gas reductions going to come from? And yet the Victorian gas substitution roadmap doesn't really embrace the kind of efficiency measures that we need to see for us to get there. In fact, it doesn't really step out any ways for Victoria to radically reduce its gas use in the way that we would need to have happen as quickly as we need it to happen. Certainly, again, the emissions reduction targets are going to require radical decrease in gas use. How are we going to get there? And even Infrastructure Victoria have pointed out that efficiency is the cheapest. So when I say efficiency, what I'm talking about is maximising the efficiency of the thermal envelope, making sure that our houses are better insulated. And Infrastructure Victoria have pointed out that is the low-hanging fruit. It's the cheapest way to immediately reduce the amount of energy that we use. And I would argue that the Victorian government should have started with some efficiency retrofit options before they went with the Victorian Energy Upgrade Program. I think that we would see much greater gains if that had been where they'd put their policy commitment first and then gone on to an appliance switching subsidy like the Victorian Energy Upgrade Program, but one that doesn't replace your old gas appliances with other gas appliances. So that's another thing that needs to happen. They can't be waiting until the end of next year to do that. They've got to get cracking with it. But yeah, I mean, the answer is agreed. Absolutely, efficiency should have been in the gas substitution roadmap. It remains to be seen whether the Victorian government is going to release another more ambitious roadmap this year with more detail. We've heard some murmurings that might be the case. We're waiting to see if that actually ends up happening. If it does, we would be really hoping that they're putting some stronger reforms on the table now that they're post-election and they're not frightened that they're going to lose government, So let's see. And it's up to us again to pressure the government and to call for better and to make sure that we're including a focus on thermal efficiency as a first port of call, because as I say to anyone who will listen, we don't know how much energy we need until we know how much energy we don't need. We have to start with reduction in our energy use before we start looking at fuel switching and replacement.
I can jump in quickly just on Viva, on the Viva EES, which I think was part of the questions as well. I think that the specific question is, when will they announce the decision on the EES? And I wish we knew. You're right. Lily D'Ambrosio has had the EES for some time now. There were almost like over 2,000 community submissions about the import terminal, which is really massive, showing like the amount of support that the community group Geelong Renewables Not Gas got against the import terminal, and we worked with Geelong Renewables Not Gas just for some of the behind the scenes stuff to support people to put in a submission to the EES. It's helped with Geelong Grammar, and we'll, the decision's got to be handed down soon, right? And so I don't have any insight into when it will be handed down. And, there's concern, if Viva doesn't go ahead, then what will happen with the Vopak one off the coast of Werribee, which is, not near Geelong Grammar. So hopefully there'll be just as much community opposition to that one as well. But yeah, it's with Lily waiting for that decision.
I think that about 60% of Victoria's forests ends up on the forest floor and is burnt or rots, and 40% is taken away, and I think about 4% ends up as timber products, and the other 36% is converted into paper, cardboard, and pallets or something like that. So Vicky's question is, are there any paper manufacturers in Victoria using waste cellulose resources, so like crop stubble, to make paper? And if not, why not? Because that would be perhaps good for replacing the native forests, perhaps. I think that's what Vicky's question is about.
But I understand that Reflex do have a recycling plant, and they run some recycled material through Maryville. It's really it's interesting that the recycled paper industry hasn't. I would suggest, because there's a lot of interest in the room on Vic Forests here, it'd be great to get the VFA on to answer some of these questions, and some of the other forest activists like Alana from Friends of the Earth is really well tapped into these issues, and she could answer these questions.
Firstly, why do you think the Liberal Party had a climate platform at all, comparative to their 2018 policy platform? And moving on from that, what should we be asking of our new Liberal MPs?
In terms of what we want new MPs to do and what we can focus on the Liberals, starting with the Libs, I think it's probably stuff on gas, which is Freya's area, and what Environment Victoria and a lot of organisations actually will be doing a lot of work on, including Get Up are working on it, Clean Energy Council have got some stuff on it, Climate Council are doing stuff on gas. We had prepared a briefing paper for the Liberal parties on gas, and how their views were sort of quite out of touch with what is necessary. I think we need to be questioning them on their turbocharging gas rhetoric, and it is pretty much rhetoric. The fracking ban is in the Constitution. Were they going to overturn that? What are their plans on shifting away from that rhetoric on turbocharging gas? I think even though they're going to be in opposition for a long time, we've got to be also working with the Labor caucus to get them excited about electrification, to ensure that there's enough sort of pressure on the government to do more in the household electrification space and the energy efficiency space. There'll be a lot of attention turned to new MPs and to returned MPs to actually build that community support, and show the community support for household electrification, incentives and rebates and all the various packages that they need to bring in order to, for the 3 million or so homes that are connected to the gas network, which will need to be addressed in the next term of government to actually go some way to meeting their climate targets.
It's interesting that it's taken the Liberals so long, in my view, to finally get around to developing something close to a climate policy. The Teals have absolutely helped with that, and in talking to James Newbury in the lead up to the election, he was frightened. He could see that the writing was on the wall. So they've had to develop a kind of a policy, albeit one that's short on detail. Opportunities for really pushing with the Liberals is to go through that policy document, to go through every public statement they have made, and to look for where the points of association are with Greens, with the ALP, with any other parties, to do some message testing of some of the Liberal policies, to see where we can get either private members' bills or notices of motion into the Parliament, and kind of pressure the Liberal Party to support those measures. And even if you take something that is mostly sort of like 75%, something that the Liberals would have had committed to pre-election, and then chuck an extra 25% that's a little bit more ambitious, but it's pretty hard for them to back down from something that's their own policy statement. So I think that that's one opportunity.
I would like to ask Meredith's question about the Western suburbs. Sorry, Ken Coghill, looks like we won't quite get to yours. The Western suburbs special case, the lowest tree density, likely to, you know, suffer the most from increased warming. Meredith wants to know, are Friends of the Earth and Environment Victoria doing anything in particular for the people in the Western suburbs, also low socio-economic group as well? Do you have any special plans for the Western suburbs?
I'm so excited to talk about the Western suburbs. Yes, we have special plans. Yes, and also they are dependent on securing the funding that we would need to do the work. It's really important for Environment Victoria to ensure that we are diversifying our supporter base and the people that work for us. I'm one of the few people of colour who work at Environment Victoria, and so actually employing people from the area to organise in their area is crucially important. So we're expanding climate activism into areas traditionally not covered by mainstream environment NGOs like ours. So we are really excited to expand our community organising program into the Western suburbs, hopefully next calendar year, maybe the year after. But yeah, such important work to be doing there on gas, in particular, looking at the various cultural groups and ethnic makeups of suburbs and cooking with gas in particular. So yeah, so I could talk about that for an hour, but Friends of the Earth are also doing great work there. So over to you, Freya.
Yeah, so this isn't my campaign specifically, but Sustainable Cities has been running really strongly. Elise Cunningham, who's the Sustainable Cities Coordinator, has already been running a really strong campaign on electric buses in the Western suburbs. You know, there's a whole bunch of housing developments that have just been plonked down with absolutely no thought of infrastructure, with streets that are too narrow for two buses to pass each other. And so, you know, they're going to have to design accessible routes. They're going to have to make sure that those buses are fast, frequent and efficient, and they're going to have to be electric. So Elise has already been on the front foot with that campaign, and she lives out in the Western suburbs as well. We're also looking at some fuel switching campaigning for next year. Similar to Sarah, we're waiting to find out if we have the funding to go ahead with that. So I don't want to say too much until that's in the bag, but definitely, I mean, it's not just the Western suburbs, although it's a really strong example of exactly what's wrong with urban planning, or has been wrong with urban planning in Victoria over the last, say, 10, 15 years. And with the expansion of the urban growth boundary, we've also had southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, Berwick, Clyde, have just had these sort of insta-burbs go up that are just not livable. Is like McMansions where you've got to have a car to get around. It's ridiculous. No schools, no hospital provisions, crazy. So it's a really strong area, and that's and it's something that's under recognised. And thanks very much for mentioning that, Meredith. It's needed to be said.
Thanks, Freya. Thanks, Sarah.
Okay, I think we'll have to end things there. My role is an easy one, which is to thank Freya and Sarah. Our job is to try to hold the Victorian Labor government to account next year, that we need to take a good rest over this holiday period because we've all been working really hard. And so we need to recharge our batteries so that we're ready to come back in 2023. The fights on forests and gas continue. Here in Burundara, we're looking at doing an Electrify Burundara campaign, which also feeds into many of the things that were said this evening. So I just want to say these organizations, Friends of the Earth and EV, are fantastic organizations. They employ wonderful people like Sarah and Freya. And so if you're not on their email lists, please get on them, and you'll be kept up to date with the campaigns that they're running, and up to date on how you can become involved with them. So I know it's a bit far away, but we wanted to tell people about our first meeting of February of 2023, which will be an evening with Simon Holmes a Court. We know he's a leader of Climate 200, but for us, he comes to talk to us about energy policy because he is an energy policy expert and commentator. So he's going to be speaking to us on Wednesday, the 22nd of February at the Chandelier Room at the Hawthorne Arts Center. If you're interested in attending, I suggest that you do RSVP on our website soon because it will be a very popular event. Simon's a great speaker and he really has his finger on the pulse of what's happening around the world with energy innovation.